How do we hold people accountable while still recognizing their humanity? Can we admire someone's actions without turning them into an idol? And when we're confronted with anger, injustice, or even outright cruelty, how do we respond in a way that aligns with our values, without becoming the very thing we oppose? These are tough questions, but they're not new ones. This week's readings wrestle with the tension between justice and mercy, between respecting leadership and rejecting corruption, and between holding onto our convictions while still embracing compassion. But as we'll see, many who claim to follow these scriptures fail to live by them. The loudest voices in modern Christianity often demand obedience, judgment, and division, while completely ignoring the calls for love, mercy, and self-reflection that their own sacred texts emphasize. Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 7th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we're going to look beyond the traditional Christian narrative to uncover a few lessons that should resonate with all of us, regardless of our religious background or lack thereof. In this episode, we're cutting through the contradictions to find real human-centered lessons. Lessons about leadership, role models, and how to navigate a broken world with integrity. Because if we want to build something better, we need more than just outrage. We need wisdom, we need perspective, and a commitment to taking the high road, even when it's the harder road. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 7th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't demand a belief in the supernatural. What that means, from a practical standpoint, is that we will assume that these stories and writings are fiction, written by a pre-scientific people who were just trying to make sense of the universe. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, but I encourage you to look for something that rings true to you. Part of the beauty of understanding these writings as sacred myths is that we're free to interpret them for ourselves. We're free to learn the lessons that we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the 7th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C. Our first reading is from 1 Samuel, chapter 26, verses 2, 7 through 9, 12 through 13, and 22 through 23. Our second reading is from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. It's chapter 15, verses 45 through 49, and our gospel reading is from Luke. It's chapter 6, verses 27 through 38. Now, we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from 1 Samuel. Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 select Israelite troops to search there for David. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul, lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" So David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. Then David crossed over to the other side and stood on top of the hill some distance away. There was a wide space between them. "Here is the king's spear," David answered. "Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards everyone for their righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed." Our second reading is from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. "Brothers and sisters, so it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural, and after that, the spiritual. The first man was of the dust of the earth. The second man is of heaven. As was the earthly man, so are those who are of the earth. And as is the heavenly man, so also are those who are of heaven. And just as we have borne the image of the earthly man, so shall we bear the image of the heavenly man." Our gospel reading is from Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "To you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." All right, so let's go back and take a bit of a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from 1 Samuel. And in this reading, there's a bit of an interesting dynamic at play. King Saul, who was once chosen by God to lead, is now actively trying to kill David, basically out of jealousy. David, on the other hand, has every opportunity to end Saul's life, but chooses not to. Why? Because he believes that Saul's anointing as king means that only God has the right to remove him. But let's take the supernatural out of this for a moment. What we have is a classic struggle between someone in power who refuses to step aside and a rising figure who has basically the moral high ground. Saul sees David as a threat, and David has to decide then how to respond. This story forces us to wrestle with an important ethical dilemma. Do we separate a person's actions from their humanity, or do we treat them as one and the same? David chose to respect Saul as a person, despite his corrupt and dangerous actions. This doesn't mean David agrees with what Saul is doing. It means he understands that Saul's wrongdoing doesn't erase his humanity. In today's world, this tension still exists. We see it in political leaders, in corrupt executives, and even people in our own communities who abuse their power. The question is, where do we draw the line? Do we hold space for their humanity? Or do we justify their removal, whether politically, socially, or even physically, when they become corrupt? Respecting the office someone holds, it can be important for stability, but it should never mean blindly tolerating unethical actions. So how do we balance justice and mercy? David's approach suggests that while we do have to hold people accountable for their actions, we shouldn't dehumanize them in the process. Even when we condemn wrongdoing, we can still resist the urge to become as ruthless as the people we criticize. Of course, this approach isn't always easy. In fact, it's rarely easy. There are people who abuse power to such a great extent that removing them from their position becomes necessary. But even then, the goal shouldn't be vengeance. It should be justice. When we separate a person from their actions, we allow space for accountability without falling into the trap of dehumanization. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that we need to separate the person from their actions. This story of David and Saul challenges us to think critically about leadership, power, and justice. It asks us to separate a person's worth from their worst actions. Not to excuse those actions, but to ensure that our pursuit of justice remains just. It's a reminder that even in moments of deep conflict, we still have a choice. Do we react with vengeance, or do we respond with a focus on justice and accountability? At the end of the day, we need to separate the person from their actions. Our second reading was from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, and in this reading, Paul is trying to explain the resurrection by contrasting two figures: Adam, the mythological first man, and Jesus, who Paul calls the second Adam. According to Paul, we inherit our mortality from Adam, but gain a spiritual, heavenly nature from Jesus. Essentially, he's setting up Jesus as the ultimate role model, the perfect figure to pattern our lives after. But even if we set aside the supernatural framing, we can recognize a deeper truth, which is that human beings look to role models for guidance. We look to role models for inspiration and for wisdom. We learn very well by example. The problem is when we start treating any one person as infallible, whether it's a religious figure, a political leader, or even a personal mentor. We see this all the time. Some people hold up religious figures or historical leaders as if they were perfect. They ignore their flaws and mistakes. Others do the same with celebrities, athletes, influencers, or politicians, defending them no matter what they say or do. Does that sound familiar? Unless you're living under a rock, you've watched that play out in U.S. politics since about 2015. But the reality is that no one is a perfect role model. Every person, whether in history or today, is complex, flawed, and capable of both good and bad. That doesn't mean we can't admire them or learn from them. It just means we need to be thoughtful about how we follow their example. Instead of blindly imitating any one person, we should seek wisdom from multiple sources, recognizing that different people bring different strengths to the table. So what does this mean for us? Well, It means we should never follow anyone unquestioningly, no matter how much we admire them. It means that critical thinking should be at the core of how we engage with our role models. It means that when we find someone inspiring, we don't just ask, how can I be like them? But we also ask, well, what lessons can I learn from both their successes and their failures? A good role model doesn't have to be perfect. They just have to be someone whose example helps us grow. So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that role models are good, but none of them are perfect. Looking up to others is a natural part of life. But no one person can be our sole guide, and no one is beyond criticism, not even mythological characters. We need to be intentional about who we learn from, recognizing that even the best role models are still human. So let's appreciate and learn from those who inspire us. But let's also remember to think critically and seek wisdom from a variety of sources. Because role models are good, but none of them are perfect. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Luke. And in this reading, Jesus calls for an extraordinary level of compassion and forgiveness, not just for those who are easy to love, but for enemies, for those who mistreat us, and even for those who actively hate us. It's a radical challenge, a challenge that goes beyond everyday kindness and gets into something a whole lot deeper, which is the willingness to respond to cruelty with grace, not retaliation. Now, whether or not you believe in the divine authority of Jesus, the basic principle here is very profound. What would the world look like if people consistently chose compassion over vengeance? What would the world look like if we saw one another's humanity first, even in moments of anger? Of course, in practice, this idea seems almost impossible to live up to. We live in a world where anger and division are everywhere, where many people, including some of the most vocal, self-proclaimed Christians, seem to have completely abandoned this teaching. Instead of showing radical compassion, they've turned to harsh judgment, extreme condemnation, and even outright hatred. They use religion like a weapon. They use it to exclude, to blame, and to dehumanize anyone who doesn't fit their narrow worldview. This passage challenges that mindset entirely. If someone truly believes these words, they should be actively working to love their enemies, to withhold judgment, to give more than they take. But how many actually do that? So where does that leave the rest of us? Even if you doubt or flat out don't believe the supernatural claims about Jesus, this message of radical compassion, I think it's still valuable. No, we don't have to accept abuse or allow people to walk all over us. But we can challenge ourselves to step back from unnecessary anger. We can challenge ourselves to extend grace whenever possible. We can challenge ourselves to seek understanding instead of feeding resentment. Will we always succeed? Of course not. This is an extreme stretch goal, something to work toward, not something we have to perfect overnight. But if we all took even small steps in this direction, our communities and our world would be far better for it. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that compassion and forgiveness are worth striving for. Compassion and forgiveness aren't about weakness. They aren't about letting people get away with harm or ignoring justice. They're about choosing a higher road. Not for the sake of those who have wronged us, but for the sake of our own growth and the kind of world we want to build. While plenty of those who claim religious authority have obviously abandoned these principles, the rest of us, whether we're religious or not, can recognize their value and try to live them in ways that actually make a difference. Because at the end of the day, compassion and forgiveness are worth striving for. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from 1 Samuel, the main lesson I came away with was we need to separate the person from their actions. In our second reading from 1 Corinthians, the main message I got was role models are good, but none of them are perfect. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was compassion and forgiveness are worth striving for. When we separate people from their actions, we create space for justice without falling into the trap of blind loyalty or absolute condemnation. No one is entirely good or entirely bad, and the reality is that even the worst people have moments of goodness, whether we see them or not, just as the best people have flaws. That doesn't mean we excuse harm or let wrongdoing slide. It means we hold people accountable for their actions while still recognizing their humanity. It also means we can admire and learn from righteous actions without turning people into idols. And that's where compassion and forgiveness come in, not as a way to ignore justice, but as tools to help us navigate a complicated world with a bit more clarity and fairness. If we can learn to approach life this way, we'll not only be better at engaging with others, but we'll also grow into stronger, wiser, and more just people ourselves. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what and now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because right now we're watching people who claim to follow a religion of humility and service, and we're seeing them bow down in blind devotion to a man who represents the exact opposite of those values. Many conservative Christians have turned Donald Trump into a political messiah. They are convinced that he has been sent by God to reshape the country into a Christian theocracy. The irony is staggering, but the real danger is that this kind of blind loyalty, it erodes justice and truth and accountability. This is important because we need to figure out how to push back against this without becoming just as rigid, without becoming just as consumed by anger and just as unwilling to listen as they are. If we want to build a just world, we can't do it by mimicking the worst tactics of the people we oppose. We have to stay grounded in integrity, honesty, and yes, even compassion and forgiveness. Not as a way of excusing what's happening, but as a way of making sure that we don't become what we claim to resist. We should care about this because it brings up another challenge. Do we even want to frame this as a fight? If we see everything as a battle, a war, a struggle, we might end up trapped in the same cycle of hostility and division. Maybe there's another way to think about this, one that's constructive instead of reactionary. Maybe there's a way to think about this that invites people in instead of just pushing back. If we want to reach the people who are uneasy about what's happening but haven't been shown a better path, we need to present something that feels hopeful, not just angry. That's the challenge. Can we confront injustice while still holding on to our values? Can we resist corruption without turning into what we despise? And can we offer a vision of the future that people actually want to be part of, rather than just another faction in a never-ending war of outrage? Here's what I think. I think we can present a hopeful path by focusing on what we want to build rather than just on what we oppose. Instead of centering our message on outrage and resistance, we can highlight the values we stand for: justice, fairness, compassion, integrity, and show what it looks like to live those values in action. People are drawn to communities that offer purpose and belonging, not just critique. By modeling a way forward that is constructive and solutions-driven and rooted in ethical leadership, we can inspire people to join us because they believe in what we're creating, not just because they're fed up with what they're leaving behind. We should care about this because hope grows when we give people something worth working toward, not just something to resist. And the last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Well, so much of what we see today, especially in politics and religion, is driven by fear, anger, and division. It's easy to get stuck in a cycle of outrage, especially when we see people blindly following corrupt leaders or pushing dangerous ideologies. But if we truly want to create change, we need to offer something better. A path forward that's grounded in justice, integrity, and hope. Instead of just resisting what's wrong, we need to show what's right. So that's what our challenge is about this week. Shifting our focus from fighting against something to building something worth believing in. With that in mind, here's your challenge for the next couple of weeks. When you're frustrated, look for a better alternative. That's it. It's a way to start shifting your mindset. For the next 2 weeks, whenever you feel frustrated about something happening in the world, whether it's politics, social issues, or even personal conflicts, pause and ask yourself, what's a better alternative? What's the world I want to help create? Then take one small action that reflects that vision. It could be as simple as engaging in a conversation with someone who disagrees with you, but doing it without hostility. It could be sharing a positive story about people making a difference or supporting an organization that promotes the values you believe in. Whatever it is, make sure it's constructive, not just reactive. When we only focus on tearing things down, we leave people feeling lost, defensive, or hopeless. But if we can show them a better alternative, when we embody the values we wish others would embrace, we give people something real to hold on to. In my current day job, I lead a team of about 10 people. And we're under attack right now because we work for the federal government. People we know, people we work with, spouses of family and friends are getting fired left and right. Dozens of the people we work with were emailed on Valentine's Day telling them their service was no longer needed. People are discouraged and scared. They're stressed out, not sleeping well. And we know that's all on purpose. Things are sent out in the evenings after everyone's logged off for the day, like 6:20 p.m. on a Friday evening before a long holiday weekend. People who have devoted their lives to serving the American people are being painted as the villains and are being treated in a way that no true Christian could ever justify. It's easy to be angry. It's easy to feel the outrage and tell anyone who will listen just how messed up this whole thing is. But that won't help my team. So I meet with them almost daily. We talk about what we're allowed to continue doing and about the importance of our mission. But I'm also doing internal training to quickly give them additional critical skills. And I'm honest with them about it. I want to make them more valuable to the organization while also making them more marketable in the event that they end up being fired. I also talk about what the future might look like. The fact that the American people will learn what we do for them, and they'll learn the hard way. They'll learn when certain critical funding and services stop. And at some point, I have to believe that the overwhelming majority of Americans will realize the truth, and then they will demand that we rebuild so many of the things that this regime is tearing down. When that happens, if we're still working here, we can help with that rebuilding. And if we're somewhere else, we may have the opportunity to come back to help rebuild everything better than it was before. Instead of just venting and focusing on fear and outrage, I'm trying to offer a constructive path. The truth is, most people don't want to live in a world of endless conflict. They want to feel like their actions matter, that change is possible, and that there's a future worth working toward. By taking small, intentional steps towards that future, we create momentum, both in ourselves and in those around us. Hope isn't just a feeling. It's something we build through our actions. So let's get to work. Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. The Jewish Talmud says, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." It's easy to feel overwhelmed by everything happening in the world. The corruption, the injustice, the blatant disregard for truth and fairness and even laws. When we see people blindly following harmful ideologies or harmful leaders, it can feel like no amount of effort will ever be enough to turn things around. But this quote from the Talmud reminds us that change isn't about fixing everything all at once. It's about doing what we can right now with integrity and purpose. This directly ties into our challenge, shifting from frustration to constructive action. We don't have to solve every problem. We don't have to dismantle every injustice in one sweeping motion. But we do have a responsibility to contribute to something better. Whether it's offering a counterpoint to fear-driven rhetoric, showing compassion where others offer condemnation, or just taking a small step toward the world we want instead of just fighting against the world that we fear. We need to remember that every action matters. Hope isn't about ignoring what's wrong. It's about refusing to let it define us. And when we do commit to doing something, even when we feel powerless, we help build the kind of momentum that actually leads to change. So take that next step. Speak up, reach out, or set an example, because as this quote reminds us, we may not be able to complete the work, but we are not free to abandon it. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week, but in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week and pay attention to the important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 7th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that hope grows when we give people something worth working toward, not just something to resist. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the New Revised Standard Version Bible, copyright 1989. The Division of Christian Education of the National Council of the Churches of Christ in the United States of America. Used by permission, all rights reserved worldwide. Thank you again for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find both the podcast and the video versions of the presentations at thecodaproject.com. CODA stands for Creating Our Divine Alignment. When we learn to align our words and actions with our core values, that alignment feels absolutely exquisite. It feels divine. But it's a divine alignment that doesn't require belief in the supernatural. It's a divine alignment we have the ability to create for ourselves. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.